This is book tour these days. You know, your new book came out last month, The Comeback. How's it going so far with the book?
Oh, there's been great reaction to it. And I wrote it with the hope that if I can help one person that's struggling from issues like finance or health or marital problems or addiction, if I can help one person find the light, I'll be happy.
You know, from experience, obviously, as well, does that help? You know, your message is a true message because it's from somebody who had some of those struggles.
Absolutely. You know, I led a charmed life, and then we got to about 2000 to 2002, 3, 5, and the wheels came off.
Well, let's go back to that charm life part of it. You're a California kid. You grew up in L.A. You go to UCLA and then go to Cal Berkeley. Did you go there thinking, okay, I'm going to be a sports agent at some point in my life?
Remember, I was at school in the tumultuous 60s, and I was student body president, and the governor of California was Ronald Reagan. So every time we demonstrated against the war in Vietnam, he cracked down, and I learned everything I ever needed to learn about the art of negotiating from dealing with Governor, later President Reagan. But I was a dorm counselor in an undergrad dorm working my way through law school, and they moved the freshman football team into the dorm. And one of the students was the quarterback, Steve Bartkowski. And in 1975, he became the very first pick overall in the first round for the NFL draft. And there really was no field of sports agentry at that time. This is 52 years ago. And so there was nothing to aspire to. So as a matter of fact, teams didn't have to deal with agents in those early years, and they could just slam the phone down and say, we don't deal with agents. I started then, and my dad raised me with two core values. One was treasure relationships, especially family. And the second was try to make a meaningful difference in the world and help people who can't help themselves, try to heal pain. So I saw in that very first experience where the athletes could be the role models, and they had such high profile that if they would retrace their roots to the high school community, set up a scholarship fund or Boys and Girls Club or work with the church, they could lay down roots and make a difference. And then at the collegiate level, same thing. So someone like Troy Aikman endowed a full scholarship at UCLA and bonded with the alums in a way that's very helpful long-term. At the pro level, we asked each athlete to find some problem they might like to tackle and set up a charitable foundation that would lead the leading business leaders, political leaders, and community leaders on an advisory board to help execute the program. So that's, for example, Warwick Dunn, who just moved to 220th single parent into the first home they'll ever own by making the down payment and moving the family in. Or it's Patrick Mahomes with his 15 and the Mahomies, where he helps kids that are hungry, kids that are in hospitals, kids that are struggling in any way. That was the basic philosophy. Over the years, I, in football, represented 64 first-round draft picks, and the very first pick in the first round, 8 different years, 12 of the players in the Hall of Fame. And we did a big baseball practice with about 60 players and some Hall of Fame players, basketball, boxing with Lennox Lewis and Oscar De La Hoya, the U.S. World Cup team, the last time it was here in 1994. And as I said, we raised incredible amounts of money for charity, and we're able to trigger imitative behavior. So that Lennox Lewis cut a public service announcement that said, real men don't hit women. And that could do more than 1,000 authority figures to change behavioral attitudes in rebellious adolescents about domestic violence.
So is that a non-negotiable for you? If you're going to represent somebody, they've got to use that platform for good and some kind of change out there.
in their own time and in their own way. Yes, Mike, I would carefully profile players, looking for people with good hearts, looking with people who are behaviorally correct, looking for people that are self-starters, and only try to represent those players that fit that description.
Certainly, you mentioned Troy Aikman, some of the other ones that went number one overall. Could you see that easily with those guys? I mean, obviously they had the talent. Patrick Mahomes has the talent, but can you see those underlying, other things that make them such a special person or player outside the arena?
So it starts with character, and then you go to work ethic. So the players that make it spend prodigious amounts of time behind the scenes, staying in shape, working out, working on a playbook. And so you look for that aptitude. And then as a player, what I want to see is, what does someone do in adversity? So the quarterback is throwing a couple interceptions. The crowd is booing. The center's looking at the quarterback like he's on hallucinogens for his play calling. What does he do now? Can he compartmentalize, adopt a quiet mind, tune out extraneous things, and elevate his level of play to take a team to and through victory? And that's the critical quality you look for, because adversity is ever present in sports.
So many agents out there, so many people in these ears of these athletes. What made you special? What made you different? Attracted some of these big time, number one draft picks?
Well, Mike, I think the first key skill set is listening. It's being able to draw out an athlete at a deeper level than just surface responses, and understand them at what truly fulfills each person, not generically, but especially. And who is this person? What are his greatest anxieties and fears? What are his greatest hopes and dreams? If you can put yourself in another person's heart and mind and see the world the way they see it and bond at a deeper level. I mean, how do they feel about short-term economic gain, long-term economic security, family, spiritual values, geographical location? An athlete being a starter, being on a winning team, the quality of coaching, the system they play, the facilities, and get a real understanding of what someone's unique priorities are, then you can represent them well.
You're doing this over 50 years. I'm sure that has changed. How have you evolved to kind of keep up with what the athlete was back in Steve Bartkowski's days to what it is now?
Well, the whole way that we transfer information has changed. When I was growing up, we all read newspapers and fought over the sports section. But today, it's all the multiple platforms of content supply. It's how does this athlete brand or look on TikTok and YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. And it's understanding that that's how they're taking information in off a computer screen, and that you need to communicate with them on that level.
Great, I'm sure, to see one of your athletes go number one overall. But that feeling, tell me about the feeling when they get into the Hall of Fame. You've had, as you said, a number of those guys that have gone on to the Hall of Fame. What is that like?
It's the best, because here you've got someone who, from Pop Warner and being a young kid through high school, college, pros, has made it all the way through, healthy enough that and talented enough that they're picked out and put into this historic Hall of Fame. Probably the highlight of my career in some ways was having Warren Moon ask me to present him in Canton at the Hall of Fame and give the speech for him. We were together actually for 23 years. He played 6 in Canada and 17 in the NFL. And so whether it's Troy Aikman or Steve Young, Derek Thomas didn't live to see it, but Kenny Easley, John Lynch, Tony Gonzalez, it's amazing, amazing feeling. And you go back, and then each of the players being inducted has this group where they give you a hat that's got his name posted, and they give you a whole pack. So you're sort of like Moonies clustered together, rooting for your player.
What was it about Warren Moon? I mean, again, he goes to the Canadian Football League. Maybe some people write him off. Why'd you stick with him? What did you see in him?
Oh, a remarkable person who's an exemplary role model, who set up the Crescent Moon Foundation that sent hundreds of kids on his school. And look, at that time, I know it's hard to remember, but there was a great deal of doubt as to whether or not a black quarterback had the intellectual capacity or leadership skills to have a team. So Warren felt like he'd be drafted, but later, and he wanted to play immediately, so he went up and signed in Canada. And then by the end of his career, he became the first African-American quarterback in modern history to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. And that had an influence on younger quarterbacks. And today you can't remember those times because so many of the black quarterbacks are superstars. And another progress is you have backups that are black. So he played a good part in breaking the color barrier.
Yeah, opened a lot of doors for current quarterback starters and backup quarterbacks as well. At what point in your career are you turning people away? You know, I'm sure at some point you're trying to establish yourself, but then you're the guy, especially when it comes to quarterbacks. Are people starting to seek out you at some point in your career?
Well, we got all the way up to 90 players in football, and 82 of them had been to the Pro Bowl. Players like Bruce Smith came over, or Derek Thomas, or Thurman Thomas. They kept coming. And the way I limited was not do more than 3 or 4 first-round draft picks. So you didn't have players feeling like they were part of some big crowd. So, you know, there was a year I had the first and second pick in the first round, or the first and fifth. So that's sort of special. And then you couldn't really process 2 quarterbacks at the same level because they felt rivalry. So, you know, Troy Aikman comes out, there's Rodney Peete, one or the other. You know, Drew Bledsoe comes out, there's Rick Meyer, one or the other. And I took Drew.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, you've got to decide at some point. You know, I'm sure they're like your kids. They're ones that stick out in your mind that have been such a joy to represent, and not just represent, to become part of the family and the fabric of who they've become.
Well, Derek Thomas was amazing from Kansas City in that he gave a speech with Bill Clinton on Memorial Day talking about his father who died as a pilot in Vietnam. He spoke to Congress about children's literacy. Steve Young was an absolute joy. I write about him in the book. He was going to be the first pick in the 84 draft, but signed in the USFL, and then went to Tampa and then got stuck behind Joe Montana. So they had 2 of the best quarterbacks, but he overcame all that. He went to law school to keep himself busy.
Yeah, the book is The Comeback. So you use him as an example of that as well, because he had Randy Cross on not too long ago. He was there during that time of Joe Montana and Steve Young, and certainly it was an interesting dynamic for the 49ers.
It was. But for example, let's take Troy Aikman. So people remember he won 3 Super Bowls in the Hall of Fame. What they don't remember is he was the first pick overall in the 1989 draft. And they told him they were going to build the whole team around him, and it wasn't very talented a team. So he was going to struggle his first year anyway. And then they had a special thing called a supplemental draft. And they drafted Jimmy Johnson's quarterback, who had just taken them to the national championship a month later. So much for your guy forever. There was already a quarterback controversy. So I talk about the way people work through those issues and the way the whole concept, resilience and recovery. So that probably takes us up to 2008-9, and that's when I crashed with alcohol.
Yeah, tell me about that. I mean, you're at the top of your game. You're the guy when it comes to NFL agents. You know, was that pressure on you? Was that part of the alcoholism?
No, it had nothing to do with it. I go into the office every day expecting there'll be something that goes wrong that we have to be careful for. So I was prepared for that. It was nothing about work. There came a period where my father, who was a rock in my life, died a long, nasty death from esophageal cancer. And I felt frustrated because I couldn't protect him. And then my two kids, my two older boys, got retinitis pigmentosa, which is an eye disease that starts with night blindness and leads to total blindness. And I felt helpless not being able to protect them. And then we lost a house in Southern California near the beach to mold, and we had to knock it down because there were toxic levels of mold. And the confluence of these events made me feel powerless and failing. And I turned to the wrong thing. I turned to alcohol to numb the pain. It started with late night drinking, and then occasionally I'd not come into the office, and ultimately it progressed. So I had to break denial about the fact I had a problem. I had to realize that the first step of a 12-step program is I'm powerless over alcohol and my life's become unmanageable. So I gave the agency to the younger agents, shut down my condo, and went back, and I was living at my parents' house in West Los Angeles. My only cogent thought, Mike, was where can I find more vodka?
Wow.
And I'd sort of been diminished to that point. So eventually I broke denial and had an epiphany that said, I'm not a starving peasant in Somalia. I don't have the last name Steinberg in Nazi Germany. I'm not sick in any other way that's alcohol. And what excuse do I have not to live up to those two admonitions, be a good father and good son, and make a difference in the world and work on those projects? I mean, our athletes in aggregate have raised about $1.3 billion for charities and made a real difference. And then I found a unique fellowship with a 12-step program. And I got a sponsor. I started working the steps. I went to 90 meetings in 90 days. I went to the different events, even the AA convention in San Antonio, the international convention. I went back to school. I realized I knew nothing about alcohol. There wasn't alcohol in our family growing up. When I didn't drink till college, and then I was widely teased as one beer Steinberg. But you can catch up in a hurry, which I did. So I went off, lived in sober living, and spent the first 3 years just concentrating on sobriety. And there are cravings that really cause you to behave irrationally, that are so strong that they overcome your conscious discipline and system. But eventually they go away. And so in March, I celebrated 16 years of continuous sobriety.
Wow. Congratulations.
And I call
Amazing.
Thank you. I call this book The Comeback, but my comeback was being a good parent and a good brother and a good friend to people in times of crisis, and working on big problems in the world, from bullying to domestic violence to racism to the environment, and helping to use the profile of athletes to make a difference.
Yeah, and you're using your platform to speak out about this. So were you ever, some people maybe are saying that they would be ashamed to do that, but you are very public about, your lows to try to help other people out.
Look, the point is people help me.
Yeah.
When I would go to those meetings, I would listen very carefully to people who had long-term sobriety and try to glean any morsel I could that might be helpful, because I might have been an expert on sports or other things in the world. I was ignorant on alcoholism. I waited about 3 years to go back, and I knew there would be questions. How can you guarantee you'll stay sober? Well, you can't. Okay, you can just indicate you're working a good program. You didn't do well with your money. How are you going to manage mine? Well, I don't manage money. We have financial planners who do that. I didn't have a divine right to represent athletes, but the first breakthrough came, I got refunded and then signed Paxton Lynch, a quarterback from Memphis, who ended up in the first round at Denver. And that was sort of symbolic because representing the quarterback had been the core of our practice. And then the next year along came a young man named Patrick Mahomes. And then later Tua Tagovailoa and Jerry Jeudy and a group of different players. And I established an agent academy where we trained young people how to listen, how to negotiate, how to recruit, how to brand and market, and all the rest of it. And then I had a crisis of conscience in the 80s because I'm representing half the starting quarterbacks. They keep getting hit in the head. And we'd go to doctors and ask how many is too many, and they had no answer. So we held the first concussion player safety conference in 94, and Troy Aikman and Drew Bledsoe and Rob Johnson and Warren Moon and Steve Young all came. And I've been holding them ever since. We do them at our Super Bowl party. And last year I established a concussion foundation to try to raise money and awareness for prevention and cure. So it's kept me busy.
It's something that's been on the forefront more of NFL and just football in general. I'm sure 70s and 80s, just get back in there, don't worry about it. But now brain health is a big part of discussions. Are you seeing things change from that standpoint?
Yes, the NFL is much better with their concussion protocol, where they have spotters trying to look for impaired players on the field. I've suggested that maybe young kids not play until they get to high school, so the brain is still in development at those earlier levels. Take blocking and tackling out of the game. They're actually, the Ivy League plays without hitting during training camp and during practices. They just model the plays and they hit in the games. And if you're watching, you can't tell the difference. And then there's two remediative protocols I've seen. One is called RTMS. That's magnets against the brain, and it can restore neural pathways. And the other is neurofeedback. And so we're making some progress. Helmetry is better, but you're never going to stop all concussions in a collision game. And it's not just pro football. It's AYSO soccer where girls head the ball and anything with collision to it.
You kind of go against the stereotype of being a sports agent. People think sports agent, they just think money, money, money. But is it, you go back to your dad and kind of the principles that he taught you, is that kind of, again, everything behind, yeah, you're a sports agent, but there's a lot more than you than that?
Well, what I try to do is view an athlete holistically. First of all, can they be a role model? Can they trigger imitative behavior and change? Second of all, let's take a look at how to safeguard your health. And there are new modalities like hyperbaric oxygen stem cells and the median NAV and red light. And then can we build the foundation for second career while you're still playing? So I would have athletes network. So like Steve Young and Brent Jones played for the 49ers. Well, Santa Clara is right next to the center of high tech and venture capital. So they both have multi-billion-dollar hedge funds. Warwick Dunn owns a small percentage of the Atlanta Falcons. So the point was, could we set them up in broadcasts like Troy Aikman and Desmond Howard? Could we set them up with their own businesses? They have brand now, which can make any business go. Troy Aikman has a new beer brand. So and this generation of athletes wants to own equity in things.
You pride yourself in being their agent for life? Look at that, not just their playing days?
Yes, because these friendships are different, Mike. They're really personal. And part of the satisfaction of working with athletes is they're so big and macho, but they don't mind telling you they love you or how much you mean to them. So the stereotypical athlete is not what I've dealt with.
You're doing this over 50 years. Are you still on the front lines? How much longer do you have?
I have about 13 players that I'm working with, and then co-representing with Chris Gabbett. And then I have the Tonga Vailoa family has an NIL group called Raising Champions. So I've been helping with that. And I don't know, 70's the new 40.
There you go. Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about Jerry Maguire. I'm sure everybody asked you about that, the 1996 movie starring Tom Cruise. It's based on you, right? How much of a role did you have in constructing who Jerry Maguire was on the screen?
Well, make no doubt about it. That is a fictitious character who is Cameron Crowe's great creation. But he called me up in 93 and asked if he could follow me around for a film that would be based on a sports agent. So he went to the 93 draft with Drew Bledsoe as the first pick. He came up to the press conference with Bill Parcells in Foxborough. He came to the league meetings with me where I was showing off free agents in Palm Desert. He came to USC scouting day, came to our Super Bowl parties, and I told him stories, lots and lots of stories. So I was also technical advisor, and so my job was to vet the script to make sure the willing suspension of disbelief that holds you in an artificial movie wasn't broken. You didn't think the dialogue was stilted or phony. You knew the look on the set was right. Then he assigned me a young actor named Cuba Gooding Jr., who played Rod Tidwell. And Cuba went with me to a Super Bowl in Phoenix, and he pretended he was a wide receiver client of mine all week. So he put him in the character. I actually had to show the quarterback in the film, played by Jerry O'Connell, how to throw a spiral, because he had gone to NYU and they didn't have a football program. So it's been 30 years, and still inevitably I'll walk through an airport or go out to dinner and someone runs up and says those 4 words start with, "Show me the
money." What about Tom Cruise? Did you know he was going to play, in essence, you? Did you agree with that choice?
Well, I mean, I take an ugly mug like mine. It is a great thing to have happen. But I feel like the film humanized sports agents to people, that they saw the true caring. I mean, Cameron saw how I interacted with a strong safety, Tim McDonald, going through free agency, and Warren Moon, and he got to see the true caring that goes into these relationships.
The book is out since March, The Comeback. Obviously, it goes beyond football. So if I'm not a football fan, why should I buy this book? What's in it for me that I could take away from your new book, The Comeback?
Life invariably will provide setbacks where you've done all the planning, but something happens in your financial life, something happens in your health, something happens in your marital or relationship, or something happens with substance abuse. And it's inevitably that we'll face these little peaks and valleys, but when you crash, how do you come back? How do any of us come back? How do we find light at the end of the tunnel? How do we find resilience? How do we get back on a path leading us out of the darkness into the light? And so every person has these events to some degree or another in their life. And my goal is to just help people that are struggling with real life problems.
Are you on social media? How can people follow you or your website? I know you do have a website with the agency.
I do. It's Leigh at SteinbergSpeaks.com. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn and all your usual suspects.
Well, Leigh, this has been a treat. I mean, when you look at agents, you're kind of the super agent for the NFL. You've got, I guess, Scott Boras from the Major League Baseball, maybe David Falk with the NBA. But to hear your story, it's incredible to see the inner workings and behind the scenes of an agent like you. You're an agent for change more than anything else. So congratulations, 16 years sober. And again, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Mike. I enjoyed it.
Great stuff. And again, breaking the stereotype of what you think an agent is, just such a caring person, and making sure that his athletes do that as well with their foundations and make sure they use those platforms in the right way. Our thanks to McKenna Dunn with the Leigh Steinberg Sports and Entertainment Agency for helping arrange that sit down here today. And again, go check out his book, The Comeback. Certainly not just sports and football, a lot in there, life lessons that you can learn. Our thanks to you for listening and watching, and we always invite you to like, to subscribe, and to share what we're doing. Great things happening here. Great guests come your way continuously here on In the Front Row. For J.R. Quitman, our creator, producer, and director, I'm Mike Vaccaro. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Another episode of In the Front Row. Have a great day, everybody.